Lately in the gaming industry, us gamers are fed lots of games in early access or in beta and alpha form. This seems to act as a safety net for fundamental problems that the game may suffer. The expression, "it's just in alpha, I'm sure they'll fix it," gets thrown around a lot. Not only that, but these projects typically lack the amount of content that justifies the asking price. There's many reasons for a game to go into early access: community feedback or financial aid, but you're always going to have to make excuses for the game developers. It hasn't been released yet. When looking at AAA developed games, it's hard to find one that's not engulfed in controversy. Ridiculous pre-order bonuses, mind-boggling PR marketing schemes, loot boxes or microtransactions that dictate the balance of the game. When a game releases from a AAA developer and publisher and it doesn't include any of these mentioned things, it sticks out in today's gaming industry like a knight in shining armor. During my time away over the Christmas holidays, I went through some personal things that related to YouTube and content creation. As I started delving into reviews and critical thinking when it came to video games, I found myself getting extremely negative and cynical towards a lot of things. I went into an experience looking for the bad and forgetting or overlooking the good. It made for great relatable content amongst other negative people, but I was getting tired of being in that mindset all the time. It was bleeding into games I had previously loved, almost forcing me to put them down indefinitely in hopes I wouldn't start hating them. As the new year came, I put the majority of my time into Escape from Tarkov. It was fun and I thoroughly enjoyed myself, but it still fell into that category of ignoring the glaring issues because it's in early development. Then Monster Hunter World was released, and it changed everything. Monster Hunter World is a third-person, somewhat hack-and-slash game with a focus on utilizing weapon combos to slay monsters. With this Monster Hunter release being more readily available as it's now on consoles, this, just like many others, is my first dive into the Monster Hunter universe, which comes as a surprise. It wasn't until late 2013, after playing through Dark Souls 1, where I realized that the medieval genre, knights in armor slaying monsters, was something I enjoyed. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, I'd labeled the medieval fantasy setting as my favorite genre. So why hadn't I played Monster Hunter before? The only things I'd seen for this series was a picture of the overly large weapons. I hadn't looked at any of the monsters or environments. I had taken a look at the weapons and thought, this wasn't for me. And I wasn't a handheld console owner at the time, which was what the Monster Hunter series had been most prominent on, but Monster Hunter was never on my radar despite it ticking all the right boxes for me. Then along came Monster Hunter World, a game I could play on my PlayStation, a franchise with years of experience and a die-hard community that loves these games. I had to try it out, and I did, and I can't put it down. In the first week of the game's release, I had put more than 90 hours into it. I was entranced by the world they had created, the unique feeling that the areas had to them. Each area had an ecosystem that was full of animals that had their own goals, homes and family, which together, coupled with the great level of detail involved in the environmental design, creates this incredible atmosphere. Each zone has their own identity both visually and in what inhabits its surrounding area. I found myself gleefully running around each area just out of curiosity, exploring every nook and cranny just to see what I could find. What I found was everything in the zone had purpose. A patch of poison flowers housed poisonous beasts. Nests high up in the sky was home to dragons. There was this strange dynamic. You almost felt like you, the player, was the bad guy. As the opening plays out, you crash land on this island known as the New World, and you go out and start studying the creatures native to the island. And this is where the game excels, the monsters. Given the title, you suspect a lot of emphasis will be put on the monsters, and indeed it does. With more monsters to come with the addition of free DLC, the current ones in the base game are all magnificent in their own right, each adding a unique fight to encounter, and as I mentioned, I'm new to this series, so for me, seeing Rathalos, Diablos, and all the returning monsters, well, this was new to me. This was my first time I saw them in action. But the thought of returning monsters from an outsider's perspective was a confusing notion, and this is completely speaking from ignorance, as I can't even get into the mindset of someone who had followed this series for years. The returning monsters have the exact same animations and moveset all across the prior games as well. Is this an issue? Does this even need to be discussed? Well, luckily for those returning folk, I'd garnered there's enough new content in Monster Hunter World to please their appetite. But moving back onto a total newcomer, it blew my mind when I first discovered subspecies. Rathalos, Pink Rathalos, Azura Rathalos, and the female Rathian. These aren't just reskinned versions, but sometimes entirely new fights. And I was fighting these monsters out in the world, and I said to myself, this has been different each time. The monster came barging through a thin wall that I had no idea was there. Then, next, I caught the monster mid-feast so I could get a powerful first hit in. Unfortunately, this loses its magic when you enter the later stages of the game. Instead of instance-based open world where you fight the monsters, it turns into a somewhat linear arena-style match where you know exactly where the monster is and where they'll go throughout each stage of the fight. So much so, the two big major fights in the story experience are the most boring, because not only do you have to repeat this section numerous times if you want to acquire the gear, but they just don't have that magic to them the open world fights have. And as I mentioned, in this linear scenario where everything is staged, that's where Monster Hunter is so special really, because not only is Monster Hunter a grindy game if you want to get the best gear, but it does a tremendous job at taking that grind and not only making it fun, but interesting. And I'm talking about the instance open world fights, because it has that element of uncertainty. Where's the monster going to be? Is another one going to turn up mid-fight? Can we trap and ambush the monster? This is fun. Extremely fun, because you have somewhat control over how it plays out. Whereas when you're in these linear fights, especially the major two story fights, they play out the same each and every time. And that grind turns into, well, a sluggish one. One where you have to turn off your brain. You don't need to be fully there, and this is not enjoyable for anyone. On the first encounter, Xeno'jiiva was amazing. I loved it so much. The style of the creature, the fight itself. Then, after the 6th and 7th time, it became predictable, and I found myself complaining a lot more than I usually would when in a fight. The fuse was a short one. But getting your mates together, tracking the monster, using the environment to your advantage is what Monster Hunter World does incredibly well. It's turned that mindless grind into an epic encounter where anything can happen, and it was captivating. This game is the first game where I've put that many hours into it in that short amount of time, and I still don't feel the fire fading anytime soon. I have a horrible habit of burning out too quickly, playing and finishing a game in the first couple of days by playing it too much, where I become bored and I look for the next thing. But Monster Hunter World has sunk its teeth into me and it's here to stay. I'm now a fan of the franchise, so much so I've already started looking at handheld consoles so I can play the others and experience what I've been missing out on all these years. The weapons in Monster Hunter is what put me off all those years ago when I first looked at those pictures, but I couldn't have been more naive. When I first started playing, I went in there and I started hitting buttons and I'd do the occasional cool thing and I'd think, how in the world did I do that? It wasn't until I started to understand that this isn't a button masher, but I'd actually have to learn the combos and, more importantly, know when to do them, did the combat in this game really open up to me. Each weapon feels as though it's an entirely different class you're playing. Not only that, but each weapon is viable in the right hands. It didn't click for me until I'd memorized the charge blade combos. I found where in previous situations where I was struggling with the moves, now it was like a dance. I was flowing through the combos, and with every hit on an enemy I felt this satisfying feedback. I was no longer a pleb with a sword who didn't know what they were doing, but I was a masterful hunter who now had experience under his belt. I'm still a pleb though. There's no end to the praise I can give this game, but with that comes issues that I personally had with it. These were not hard to come up with because the game is so good and it does so much stuff brilliantly, the negative aspects stuck out like a sore thumb. But don't get me wrong, the positive outweighs the negative in glorious fashion. I found myself questioning hitboxes a lot of the time, and asking how certain attacks hit me. The games I typically play have quite refined hitboxes, and part of me feels as though this is just part of the game. I'll have to get used to it and play around it. Instead of complaining about the game, you have to look at yourself and see what mistakes you may have made during that fight. So it's very hard to be critical of this certain aspect when I don't fully understand it. Perhaps there's some area of effect type of damage that I'm missing out on. I honestly don't know. As I mentioned, players who are veterans to the franchise will be more familiar with the hitboxes and how they function, I've only been playing it for a week now, so I have nowhere near the amount of understanding that they do, so it would be pretty idiotic of me to try and critique it. The only other small gripe I have with Monster Hunter World is how you connect to other players. I found it confusing with how that whole side of it worked. You can't join expeditions outright, and you can't join if the other player hasn't watched the required cutscene, which I found odd. I thought at first this might be a technical limitation, but in the final fight, you watch a cutscene while other people are in your party, so I'm not really sure why this is implemented. It would be far easier for your group to get together from the get-go, watch the required cutscene altogether, and then continue with the fight. Why this is in, I don't really know. Off the top of my head, that's the only real gripe I have with this game, so it's very petty, and it doesn't really have an impact on my user experience at all. These past few months, I've been on a journey to better myself. Those who have been with the channel for a while know I suffer from some pretty serious mental health issues, and they came back in full force, which is why I took the break I did. In that time, I fell out of love with video games. I found myself playing stuff just to pass the time, and not because I was enjoying it, but more so because I didn't know what to do. Escape from Tarkov helped in that regard. It was fun, but Monster Hunter World was a different kind of fun. It reminded me why I play video games: to get lost in a world, to get truly immersed, to leave that other stuff behind and forget about some of the real life troubles and just zone out and kill awesome monsters with my friends. You have to take the time to appreciate the stuff that can have that impact on your life. As pretentious as it sounds, Monster Hunter World has helped me ground myself lately. And maybe it's temporary, maybe it's just there for the time being a distraction while I figure stuff out, but it's one hell of a distraction. As I venture deeper into this new world I've discovered, I'm reminded that quality in this industry does still exist. Monster Hunter World was a refreshing experience, and I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. Take care, be good to one another, and I'll see you next time.